I was lying in a hospital bed fighting cancer when I noticed $14,000 gone from my medical account. I had called my son and asked him directly, "Did you take my money to buy yourself a car?" He looked right at me and said, "Dad, you've got plenty. What are you holding on to it for? My wife's family has needs too." I sat there staring at the boy I had raised my whole life, coming to terms with the fact that the person I trusted above all others may have been waiting for me to go under. My name is Vernon Haley. I am 72 years old, and I have been sitting in this same kitchen chair for 42 years. Same chair, same window, same oak tree out back that my wife Lorraine planted the spring we moved in, back when her hair was still dark. And my eyes, both of them, still worked just fine. Welcome back to Honor Revenge Stories, a place where real pain leads to real justice and where the people who get underestimated tend to be the most dangerous ones in the room. If stories like this one reach something in you, I'd be grateful if you'd follow along and leave, like it helps more people find their way here. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something. When you sit down with a story like this one, what are you really hoping to walk away with a sense that justice still exists, or something more personal than that? Tell me in the comments. Now, a quick note, some details in this story have been shaped for narrative purposes, and any resemblance to specific real individuals is purely coincidental. What matters is the truth at the center of it. That oak has grown past the roofline now. Lorraine always said she wanted something rooted in that yard that neither of us would live to see the top of. She got half that wish. I lost the left eye at 58. Shop accident. A sliver of metal fingernail size traveling faster than anything that light has any business going. The medical term was traumatic rupture. My term for it was a Tuesday. 4 decades around heavy equipment teaches you one thing above all else. The machinery doesn't factor you into its schedule. You clock in, you put in the hours, and occasionally the job extracts a payment on the way out. Lorraine left me 4 years ago. Ovarian cancer. She endured it exactly the way she endured everything else, with her jaw set and her voice low. No theatrics, no complaint, until the very moment she had no option left. Her final morning, she gripped my hand and reminded me the oak tree was going to need mulch laid down before the cold came. That was Lorraine to the bone, sensible until her last breath. Once she was gone, the house on Maple Run Lane turned a particular kind of silent, not restful silent, the other kind, the kind that pools in the far corners and keeps an inventory of every voice you'll never hear again. I figured out how to cook a single portion. I figured out how to occupy the center of the bed. I figured out that a man will adapt to almost anything when the alternative is not adapting. 8 months back, my physician at Atrium Health's Carolinas Medical Center, a no-nonsense precise woman by the name of Dr. Adaiz Naji, called me into her office and delivered the news: nasopharyngeal carcinoma, a malignancy of the nasopharynx, the passage that connects the back of your nose to your throat. Stage 2, she said, manageable, but costly and slow. Radiation possibly, chemotherapy, ongoing monitoring, a course of treatment measured not in weeks but in months. "Mr. Haley," she said, and she brought her folded hands forward onto the desk. "Is there somebody in your life who can assist with scheduling and the ordinary demands of the day? Living alone through something like this is no small thing." I told her I had been handling weighty matters on my own for 4 years and didn't anticipate this one being any different. She offered me the expression doctors reserve for patients who make confident declarations that don't hold up. Then she handed me the treatment schedule anyway. I drove home and did exactly what Lorraine had always drilled into me, laid the figures out, and faced them squarely. My finances were solid, more than you'd guess for a man who spent his career under car hoods, because I had lived all 40 of those years on the principle that ease today is debt tomorrow. If I could repair it, I didn't replace it. If I couldn't earn it, I didn't borrow it. After Lorraine's death, I'd spread a legal pad across the kitchen table and mapped every account, every holding, every last dollar, then shifted the bulk of it into a protected trust one that won't release a cent without my personal authorization. The lawyer who set it up, a measured older fellow who has since hung up his briefcase, used the phrase estate planning. I called it minding what was mine. My son Nathan was aware I had money put away. He had no idea of the amount, and he had no idea the trust existed. I'd kept those details to myself, because Lorraine had always said a man should play his hand close until the game requires otherwise. Nathan is 42, living across town, with his wife Corinne in a house I helped him get into. 12 years back, a down payment offered as a wedding gift, never referenced again. His profession is medical equipment, sales, the variety where a well-dressed man persuades hospital purchasing departments that they require products they'd probably already considered. He excels at it. He inherited Lorraine's smile and my father-in-law's tenacity, and he deploys both with purpose. Between us, we manage a phone call every few weeks. Birthdays, the holidays, an occasional Sunday check-in. Distant isn't quite the right word for it. What we had was more like closeness that had gone still, the way a piece of old furniture sinks into the floor over time, until you forget it can be moved at all. Then one Tuesday in March, I was finishing my second cup and watching a mockingbird work through the bird feeder Lorraine had hung from the lowest oak branch when the phone buzzed. Nathan's name on the screen, 8:47 in the morning. The boy hadn't dialed me before midday on a work week in years. I picked up. "Dad." The warmth in his voice was immediate and excessive, the particular warmth of a man who has run his lines beforehand. "How are you holding up? Honestly, right now I'm watching a bird eat," I told him. "Say what's on your mind, Nathan." A laugh came back a beat too loose. "Corinne and I have been talking," he said, "both of us, about you being out there by yourself with this medical situation. We want to come and stay with you a while, Dad. Be there, help out." Something happened in my chest that I wasn't prepared for. It rose. No build-up, no warning, just a sudden lift. The way a balloon goes the instant you open your fingers. I flattened my palm on the kitchen table to hold myself down, because at 72, I've learned that a feeling that moves that quickly is not one to trust straight away. "That isn't necessary," I said. My voice held up better than I did. "We want to, Dad. You're our family. Family shows up." I looked back out at the oak at the branch where the mockingbird had been now empty at the patch of yard, where Lorraine used to stand on Saturday mornings, cradling her coffee and addressing the birds as though they were obligated to listen. "Think about it," I said. "Don't take too long," Nathan said, the warmth still sitting easy in his voice. "We've got the calendar open." After we disconnected, I didn't move from that chair for quite a while. Sentiment isn't something I carry much of. The machine shop doesn't leave room for it. 4 decades in that environment. Trade sentiment in for something that actually serves you steadiness and the ability to hear what's genuinely wrong beneath the noise. But I am still a father. And a father who has spent 4 years alone in an empty house with a disease for company doesn't brush off the sound of his son saying, "We want to be there with you." I was hungry to believe it, more hungry than I'd been for much of anything since Lorraine went. But the timing of that call nagged at me. The warmth dialed just a little too high, the concern shaped a little too neatly, and it lodged itself in the back of my thoughts, the way an engine knock does when you can't pinpoint the cylinder. Not bad enough to pull over, impossible to ignore. I emptied the rest of the mug into the sink, washed it the way Lorraine had shown me, and stood it upside down in the rack. "Lorraine," I said into the quiet of that kitchen, "our boy says he's coming home." I kept to myself what I was already starting to wonder about his reasons. 7 days. That's the span it took for Nathan to arrive at my front door, carrying 2 duffel bags, a suit carrier draped over his arm, wearing a grin that looked freshly pressed. Corinne followed him up the porch steps with an overnight bag dangling from one hand and a foil-covered store-bought casserole in the other, and before I'd said a word, she announced, "Vernon, we brought dinner," as though she'd been doing it every week for years. Standing in my own doorway, I felt the floor of my chest shift. Not that rising sensation from the phone call, something grittier than that. The sound a drive belt makes in the moment before it gives. "You didn't have to bring food," I said. "Oh, of course we did." Corinne rose on her toes and pressed her lips to my cheek. In the 15 years I'd known this woman, she had done that exactly once at the graveside, when grief makes people reach for gestures they don't normally make. Something must have crossed my face because she stepped back and widened the smile. "You're looking well, Vernon. Doesn't he look well, Nathan?" "He's looking great," Nathan said, and gave my shoulder a firm clap, the kind that doubles as a nudge when a man is standing between you and the hallway. I moved. They crossed the threshold. I tracked Corinne as she passed through the front room, her eyes skimming each surface. In turn, the bookshelves, the end tables, the corner cabinet where I store my paperwork in the labeled folders Lorraine had me organized decades ago. There was a thoroughness to the way she looked that I knew from experience. It was the same survey I used to run the moment I stepped into an unfamiliar engine bay. Methodical, unhurried, committing everything to memory before saying a word. "Nothing's changed in here," she remarked, and buried inside that sentence was something I couldn't get a grip on quite yet. I said, "I keep it the way it is on purpose." Nathan hauled the duffel bags to the foot of the stairs and folded his cuffs back. He looked more at ease than I'd seen him in a good while, truth be told. That loosened-up version of my son that typically only surfaced after a couple of beers at a backyard gathering. "Let me get these upstairs, then I'm at your disposal, Dad. Groceries the yard, whatever you need." "Yard's fine," I said. "I'll take a look all the same." Corinne was already moving through my kitchen, pulling cabinet doors open, asking where I stored my serving dishes, carrying on about the casserole like it was an occasion. She'd made chicken and dumplings Lorraine's recipe almost. Close enough that when the smell drifted over it, landed somewhere beneath my ribs. "How did you know to make this?" I asked. She turned and smiled. Bright, practiced. "Nathan told me it was one of your favorites." I wanted the evening to feel like home. I thanked her. And I meant it even as something in the way she said the word home made me want to check that my wallet was still where I had left it. Supper had the look of family from across the room. Nathan going on about the drive over the traffic backed up on I-85, a story about someone at his office that I was fairly certain I'd heard a different version of at Thanksgiving 2 years prior. Corinne topping off my water glass before I'd gotten halfway through it, asking about my treatment schedule with the careful precision of someone who had researched the right questions in advance. "When's your next appointment with Dr. Naji?" she asked. 3 weeks, I said. "Would it help if Nathan drove you? The traffic around Atrium Health can be rough. I've been making that drive on my own for 8 months, I said. "I know the way." She nodded and smiled again. Her smiles arrived so fast and so fully formed that I found them tiring after a while, the way certain machines are tiring. Always in motion, never idle, and you start to wonder what happens the moment they shut down. After the dishes were cleared, while Corinne loaded the dishwasher, Nathan pulled a chair across from me at the kitchen table, cradled his coffee mug, and asked how I was really getting on. Not the surface answer, the real one. His eyes were earnest in a way that put a tightness in my throat because they were Lorraine's eyes, the same shape, the same dark brown, and it has never stopped costing me something to look squarely into them. "Treatment's running its course," I told him. Some fatigue, some rawness in the throat. Dr. Ninji said the imaging from last month was pointing in the right direction. "That's good." He reached over and pressed his hand to my forearm. "Dad, I need you to hear this. Corinne and I are not going anywhere. Whatever you need for as long as it takes." Something in my chest responded to that, the traitorous thing. "You've got work," I said. "Lives of your own. I won't have you rearranging them on my account." "You're not a burden," he said, and there was iron in his voice. And then it cracked just barely on the final word. The kind of crack a voice makes when the feeling behind it is genuine, or when a man has run the line often enough that his body has learned to perform it on cue. I spent 40 years with my ear against machines learning the difference between a sound that's natural and one that's been produced. I still couldn't say for certain which this was. After Nathan headed upstairs to unpack, I stayed at the table. Corinne came back and settled across from me with her tea, and we passed the time in the way two people do when each is waiting on the other to get to it. "Vernon," she said at last, turning her mug slowly between her palms. "I hope you know Nathan talks about you constantly. He genuinely worries. He doesn't have to," I said. "It's hard for him watching you carry all of this by yourself." She held her expression at warmth. "And honestly, things have gotten stretched thin for us lately. Being here gives us a chance to support you, and also honestly to pare things back a bit on our end." She let out a small laugh as if the sentence had been meant as something casual. "Not that that's why we came, obviously." I looked down at my coffee cup. "Obviously," I said. She excused herself not long after. I sat alone in the kitchen Lorraine had laid out in the house. I had built a life inside, and I turned Corinne's words the way I used to turn a damaged part slowly in both hands, searching for where the fracture began. Things have gotten stretched thin. Pare things back on our end. I got up, rinsed my cup, folded the dish towel, threw the oven handle the way I've always done. Then I moved to the hallway and looked up toward the glow coming from under the guest room door. "Good night," I called. "Night, Dad?" Nathan called back easy and warm as a Sunday. I went to bed, lay there in the dark. Somewhere around midnight I became aware of their voices through the wall low, and measured the particular register people use when they believe the old man has already gone under. I caught only 2 words before the air conditioning cycled on and took the rest with it. The words were the account. My eyes came open in the dark. I lay still and felt something inside my chest go very quiet. Not the restful kind of quiet, the kind that settles in when you realize you have already understood something and have simply been refusing to look at it directly. 4. 8:45 in the morning. 4 decades of punching a clock doesn't dissolve when you retire. It calcifies in your bones, pulling you upright before the sky has made up its mind. I had my first cup poured and was standing at the kitchen window by 5 watching the oak silhouette hold itself against a sky that hadn't yet committed to a color. That's when I heard at the laptop, the soft, deliberate tap of keys being pressed one at a time, unhurried, careful. The rhythm of someone who does not want to be heard. I turned. Nathan was seated at my kitchen table in the near dark, his face bathed in the pale blue cast of the screen. The instant he registered me, his hand shot across and snapped the lid shut, the crack of it splitting the quiet kitchen like something breaking. My pulse hit hard. I held my expression where it was. "Morning," I said. Nathan's jaw went rigid for exactly 1 beat before the smile appeared. "Dad, you're up early." "Always have been," I said, and crossed to the coffee maker like a man whose hands weren't gripping the mug a little too firmly. "What were you looking at? Nothing that matters." He rolled his shoulders back and manufactured a yawn. "Just scanning the news. Couldn't get back to sleep. Anything happening out there? Same as it always is." He pushed back from the table, slid the laptop aside. "Here, let me get that coffee. Sit down, Dad." "No reason to be standing this early. I was up at 5 before you came into the world," I told him. "But I sat because a man who is keeping watch doesn't broadcast that he's doing it. He sits, he listens. He lets time work." We drank coffee together in the early morning light, Nathan filling the air with comfortable, nothing a ball game he'd half paid attention to the night before, whether the gutters over my porch might need clearing ahead of the spring rains. Easy conversation, warm conversation. The kind that furnishes a room so completely that you very nearly miss what it's designed to keep you from thinking about. Very nearly. Corinne came downstairs around 7:30, put together in a way that seemed like a lot of effort for a Tuesday morning in somebody else's kitchen. She drew herself a cup of coffee, leaned back against the counter, and fixed me with an expression I was starting to know well. Bright, purposeful, the look of a woman who has a list and is deciding where to begin. "Vernon," she said, "I've been thinking you've got quite a lot of paperwork in that corner cabinet. Medical records, insurance, all of it. That has to be a lot to stay on top of by yourself. I'd be glad to help you sort through it. Organization is genuinely something I'm good at." I raised my eyes from my mug. "That cabinet has been in order the same way for 20 years. "I know," she said, and waved her hand in a manner that was somehow both dismissive and pleasant at once. "But things accumulate. Medicare supplemental coverage investment statements, it adds up fast. I did all of it for my father. I appreciate the offer," I said, keeping my voice even. "But I know where everything is." She started to speak, then didn't, then smiled instead. "Of course. Just say the word if that ever changes." I told her I would. We both understood I wouldn't. After breakfast, Nathan announced he had an errand to run, picking up a prescription for me. He said, since he was heading out, regardless. He lifted my car keys from the hook by the door, without a word of asking, gave them a single jingle, and said he'd be back within the hour. I watched through the kitchen window as he reversed my truck out of the driveway. He did not head toward the pharmacy. He sat in my truck in my own driveway for 19 minutes, with his phone against his ear. I could see his mouth going animated, pressured the way a man talks when what's being said matters and he needs to be sure no one overhears. My stomach turned over slowly, like an engine reluctant to catch. When he finally pulled away, I moved not in a rush, but methodically the way I'd always worked. I went to the garage to the green metal toolbox in the corner that had been mine since 1985. On the bottom shelf underneath a socket wrench set and a folded shop rag, I keep a small tin box. Inside that tin is a spare key to my filing cabinet. Lorraine was the only other person who ever knew it was there. I told nobody after she passed. I opened the tin. The key was present, but the tin had shifted. Not by much. Maybe 2 inches to the left, enough that the corner no longer lined up with the impression it had pressed into that shelf over the better part of 3 decades. I stood there holding the key in my open palm and felt a cold certainty crawl slowly up my back. Someone had been into that tin, had found the key, possibly put it to use. I went to the filing cabinet in my home office and checked the lock. No sign of tampering. Everything inside looked to be where I'd placed it, but a feeling is a feeling. And 4 decades of working on machines that conceal their faults had long since taught me to trust the ones that make your hands go cold. I returned the key to the tin, nudged it 2 inches back to where it had always sat, and walked to the kitchen. I poured a third cup of coffee and was sitting at the table reading the paper when Nathan returned 40 minutes later, carrying the faint smell of a drive-through he hadn't mentioned. "Get everything taken care of?" I asked. "Yep." He held up a small pharmacy bag he'd gone just not first. "Anything else you needed while I was out?" My chest burned with something I wouldn't allow to reach my face. "Not a thing, thank you, son." He ruffled my shoulder the way he used to at 16 when he thought affection was something to be embarrassed about. My eyes stung in a way I despised because even then, even with what I was beginning to understand, I loved my boy. The way fathers love sons who have let them down entirely with no good place to set that love down. Lorraine had started the habit and I never let it lapse. First of every month without fail, sit down, open the account, read through every line. "A man who stops watching his own numbers ends up at the mercy of them," she used to say, tapping the kitchen table with one finger to drive it home. 38 years of marriage and she never stopped saying it, because 38 years had taught her I needed to hear a thing more than once before it settled in. It was the 1st of April. I sat at my desk after supper with my reading glasses and my laptop and logged into First Carolina's bank the way I had done on the 1st of every month for the past 11 years. The balance struck me like something solid hitting the chest. I pushed my glasses up, read the figure again, because a man my age has learned not to act on the first reading of anything that matters. The number held, $14,200 gone. Withdrawn on March 27th in a single transaction. The memo line read, "Auto purchase Carver family." My hands, I noticed, had begun to tremble. Not violently, a fine, steady vibration, the kind the body produces when it is taken in, something the mind hasn't caught up to yet. I pressed both palms flat on the desk and breathed through my nose the way Dr. Naji had shown me for managing the harder days of treatment. In for 4 counts, out for 4. Carver. That was Corinne's family name. Gerald and Wanda Tolliver, her parents who lived 40 minutes south of Charlotte, in a house Corinne described, whenever she brought it up primarily in terms of square footage. Auto purchase. Someone had raided my account to buy a car for Corinne's parents. I pushed back from the desk, walked to the kitchen, and stood at the sink with cold water running over my wrists. An old mechanic's remedy for when the blood runs too hot and the hands stop cooperating. The water ran. My heart hammered. When my hands steadied, I went back to the desk, sat down and typed one message to Nathan. "Come down when you get a minute. Need to ask you something." He was in the doorway 3 minutes later, relaxed in his sweatpants, a glass of iced tea in hand. "What's up, Dad?" "There's a charge on my account," I said, keeping my voice level, and even the same voice I'd used with suppliers who thought they could pad an invoice. March 27th, $14,200. Memo reads auto purchase Carver family. I turned the laptop screen so he could see it. "You want to explain that to me?" Nathan looked at the screen. Something traveled across his face, quick, controlled, and was gone before I could put a name to it. Then he drew out the kitchen chair and settled in across from me, relaxed the posture of a man prepared to have a sensible discussion. "Yeah," he said. "I was going to bring that up." My jaw tightened so hard I could hear it. "Were you—" "Dad, come on." He put the iced tea down and brought his elbows to the table. Gerald's car was finished, past finished, 200,000 miles on it. The brakes had nothing left. He and Wanda needed something they could rely on. Then Gerald and Wanda should have bought a car, I said. "It's not that straightforward." Nathan spread his hands wide, the gesture of a man walking someone through the obvious. "They live on a fixed income. Wanda's dealing with medical bills. I wanted to do right by them. They're family, Dad. Corinne's parents are my family, which means they're yours too. That money," I said, and the words came out lower than I'd intended. "Rougher was in my medical account. I set it aside for treatment costs specifically. You've got plenty, Dad." Something shifted beneath his tone, still warm on the surface, but with weight pressing through it now. "You've got more put away than most people see across their whole lives. $14,000 isn't going to put you on the street. It's 2 months of treatment, Nathan. Insurance covers the bulk of it. My insurance covers part of it." I was gripping the edge of the desk. I made myself let go. "The rest comes out of my own pocket, and I have been setting money aside for that since before you understood what a savings account was." Nathan leaned back and crossed his arms. The warmth in his expression was thinner now, still present the way paint stays present over rust. But you could see what was underneath. "Dad, I just think you've got all that money sitting there, and you're alone and you're not getting younger. What exactly are you holding on to it for? What's it all for?" The question sat in the air between us, and something in my chest broke cleanly. Not from anger, but from grief, because I had heard that question before. Different mouths, same shape. It is the question people ask when they have decided that what they want from you matters more than your right to decline. "It's my money, son," I said quiet. He leaned in again, lowering his voice to the register people use when they want to sound like they're doing you a kindness. "Dad, I married into this family. The Tollivers are my wife's people. Are you really going to be the man who tallies every dollar when it comes to the people his son loves? You've got this house, you've got your truck, you've got your savings." He reached across the table and covered my hand with his. "You can't take it along when you go. Might as well put it to use while you're here." I looked down at his hand resting on mine, my son's hand, the same hand I'd held in parking lots at Lorraine's bedside at his college graduation. The hand of a boy I had put everything into raising, and that man had taken $14,000 of my cancer treatment money, handed it to near strangers, and dressed my objection up as selfishness. The tears were there pressing hard behind my eyes, and I turned them back, refused them completely because I was not going to weep in front of a man who had just informed me that my savings existed chiefly for his convenience. I withdrew my hand, folded both of them in my lap out of his reach. "All right, Nathan," I said. My voice was steady. "All right," and his shoulders dropped with relief. He took that to mean yes. He took it to mean I'd come around to his way of seeing it. He reached for his iced tea, took a long pull, and said, "I knew you'd get it, Dad. You always come around." I gave him one nod. Let him believe what he wanted. Because 4 decades around engines had taught me one thing above all others. You don't let the machine know you've found the fault. Not until you're ready to fix it permanently. I didn't go to bed that night. After Nathan headed upstairs after the house settled into its nighttime sounds, I sat at my desk and did what I had always done when something was damaged and I needed to understand exactly how badly. I went back to the beginning. I pulled 6 months of bank statements, October through March, and sent every page to the printer. The old machine in the corner ground through them, the way old printers do, slow and deliberate, and I sat there listening to it, aware of how hard I'd been clenching my jaw since dinner. When the last page fed through, I spread them all across the desk in sequence. Then I went to Lorraine's knitting bag in the closet, the one I hadn't touched since she left, and took out her blue marking pen. She'd used it for patterns. I was using it now for something she would have hated to see me need. I started in October. "You're going to find something, Vernon," I said out loud, because the house had been empty long enough that talking to myself had stopped feeling strange 2 years back. The only question is how much. The first circled entry showed up 11 minutes in. October 19th, a $420 withdrawal, no memo attached. Made on a Saturday. The same Saturday Nathan had come by to help with the yard and asked to borrow my debit card to run to the hardware store for mulch and fertilizer. I remembered that Saturday clearly. I remembered handing him the card. I remembered him returning with 2 bags of mulch and $20 in change. It had never occurred to me to check what else had been charged, because I trusted my son the way you trust the load-bearing walls of a house you've lived in for decades. My pen circled the entry. My hand was steady. My chest was not. November had 3 more. 160s on the 3rd. Nathan had driven me to my follow-up that day. Dropped me at the entrance and went to park the car himself. $280 on the 17th, a Thursday. I couldn't place that one. $640 on the 29th. Thanksgiving week, when Nathan had offered to manage the grocery shopping because he said I shouldn't be on my feet so much. I circled all 3 and noted the dates in the margin of a legal pad. By December, I was sweating, though the room was cold. December held 2 entries, one for $310, one for $890. January had a single large one, $1,800 on the day Nathan drove me to Atrium Health's Carolinas Medical Center for blood work. I had sat in that waiting room for 2 hours, reading a magazine about fly fishing. My son had been outside with my debit card for 2 hours, spending $1,800 on something I would never be told about. February, March, more circles, more dates. When I finally set the pen down and looked at what I'd assembled, 9 separate transactions spread across 6 months. I ran the sum twice because I am the kind of man who won't trust a number that makes him want to be sick until he's checked it twice. $8,340. Add that to the $14,200 from the car, $22,540. I spoke the number out loud in my empty office, and my voice fractured on the final syllable, a clean break right through the middle of it. And before I knew what was happening, I had pressed both hands over my mouth because something was rising in my throat that was part sob and part a sound I had no word for. I sat there with my palms against my lips and my eyes burning until the wave passed. Then I picked up the legal pad, turned it to the blank side, and wrote in block letters. October 2023. Nathan started coming around more. November 1st, first small withdrawal. This was no accident. This was a plan. You planned this, I said to the ceiling, to my son sleeping upstairs, to the version of Nathan I had raised and evidently not fully known. You had this in motion before you ever picked up the phone. The grief of that was enormous. Not the anger, the grief, the particular specific grief of a father who understands that what he believed was his son choosing to come home was actually his son choosing to come for what he had. I folded the legal pad and slid it inside the cover of the Bible on my nightstand. Lorraine's Bible, the one with her handwriting threaded through the margins, the one no one would think to look through because no one in that house read it but me. Then I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark and talked to Lorraine the way I had every night since she went. I think our boy is in real trouble, I told her, the kind that originates inside a person. I rubbed my face with both hands, feeling the texture of old skin and the hollow where my left eye had been. I don't know how to fix this one, Lori. I could work out anything mechanical. I cannot repair a man who has concluded that his father's suffering is a resource to be drawn from. The room offered nothing back but the hum of the air conditioning and the muffled sound of a car passing on Maple Run Lane. But I am going to try, I said. I am going to be deliberate about this, and careful, because I will not allow him to take the rest. Not another dollar. I lay back on top of the covers, fully dressed, and stared at the ceiling until the first gray seam of light appeared at the curtains. Sleep never came, but by the time the sun was up, something was taking shape in my mind. Not yet a plan, just the outline of one. The way you can sense the shape of a repair before you've identified which tools the job will call for. That was sufficient for the moment. It had to be. 2 weeks after I found those statements, I gave them exactly what they'd been waiting for. I told Nathan at breakfast that I was worn down, which was the truth. Treatment fatigue is a real and grinding thing, the kind that settles behind your eyes and burrows into your joints and reminds you every waking hour that your body is fighting something it never agreed to carry. I told him I needed to lie down after lunch. He nodded, wearing the expression of concern he had refined to a Polish patted my hand, and said, "Rest was the most important thing right now." I went upstairs, lay on top of the covers, left the bedroom door open exactly 4 inches enough to carry sound from the hallway, enough to look shut from below. Then I waited. 40 years of listening to engines taught me this. The machine tells you everything if you give it time and keep your hands still. People are no different. Give them quiet and the conviction they're unwatched, and they will give you everything they've been concealing. I heard Corinne's voice first drifting up from the kitchen below, bright and clipped the way it always sounded when she believed no one of consequence was listening. "He bought it," she said, and the satisfaction threaded through those words turned my stomach. Hook, line, and sinker. He actually apologized to Nathan this morning for making a fuss about the car. I heard Nathan's low laugh. "He always comes around, can't stand conflict, never could. God, it's almost too easy." The refrigerator opened then closed. You know what gets me, though? He's sitting up there worried about his medical bills like he's one rough month from losing everything, and the man has more money than he knows what to do with. It's wasteful, honestly. "Corinne?" Nathan's voice carried a thread of caution. "No, I mean it." Her voice had gone harder now, stripped of the social layer she wore like a coat. One-eye throat cancer alone in this drafty old house. What exactly is he saving it for? She dropped lower into something that had no warmth left in it. The man shuffles through these rooms like a ghost. Half blind, can barely get through a meal without coughing, and he wants to lecture us over $14,000. Above them, my hands lay flat on the quilt and slowly curled into fists. I did not move. I breathed. "Don't talk about him that way," Nathan said. But his voice had no spine in it, the objection of a man troubled by the tone, not the substance. "I'm talking about facts, Nathan." Her heels clicked against the kitchen tile back and forth. She paced when she talked. I had clocked that. Dr. Nanaji said stage 2. Could be 2 years, could be 5. We can't afford to sit on this for 5 years. A pause. Gerald already picked out the color for the next one. The next one. Another car. "We need to slow down," Nathan said. And there was something in his voice, not conscience exactly, more like fear. The fear of a man who has lit something and is only now registering how close his own house stands to the fire. We don't need to slow down, Corinne said. We need to be smarter, smaller amounts, spread out. He barely checks the statements. He barely checks the statements. Those words drove into me like something solid, the way that metal shard had stolen my eye, quick and small, and leaving damage you never undo. My throat closed up, and it had nothing to do with the cancer. It was the particular merciless pain of lying ill in your own bed, while your son's wife one floor below laid out the timetable for gutting everything you owned. And the house, Corinne went on her tone, lifting into something almost breezy, is worth at least $400,000 in this market. Have you brought up adding your name to the deed again? When Sacidis, when Sirdasgord. Not yet. Nathan's chair dragged across the floor. It's not straightforward. He's sharp, Corinne, a lot sharper than you'd think. Then we need to move on the conservatorship conversation soon. Get him evaluated. Establish that he needs assistance managing his affairs. The doctor might even help us make the case if we frame it right. Something in how she said it all clipped efficiency, no warmth turned my stomach. Once we have legal authority over his finances, the rest takes care of itself. Conservatorship. I understood the word. It's a legal mechanism the United States uses when an elderly person is judged unable to handle their own affairs. A court names someone a conservator, who then controls that person's money and sometimes dictates where they live. On paper, it exists to shield people who genuinely can't protect themselves. In the wrong set of hands, it becomes a perfectly lawful way to drain a person dry, while a judge's signature holds the gate open. My son and his wife were sitting in my kitchen talking about doing exactly that to me. I stayed on that bed and fixed my eyes on the water stain above me, the one that had been spreading across the ceiling plaster since 1997 when a pipe in the upstairs bathroom gave out. I traced its outline, 4 edges, 5, 6, because if I didn't anchor my mind to something anything, I would be down those stairs before I was ready. And I was not ready. One last time, Corinne's voice rose up through the floor, easy satisfied, carrying the certainty of a woman who has never genuinely entertained the idea of being wrong. Tell your father he needs more rest, Nathan. We wouldn't want him poking around in things that don't concern him. A light, pleased little laugh. He trusts you. That's honestly all it takes. I heard Nathan produce a sound that belonged in no clear category, not a yes, not a no, and somehow functioning as both. Then footsteps. The back door swung shut behind him, and the house went silent. I opened my hands and laid them flat against the quilt. My pulse was battering so hard, I could track it up into my jaw against the cancer, against the exact spot Dr. Naji's treatments were working to hold the line so that my son's wife could plan what to do with my property once I stopped being a problem. I turned toward the photograph propped on the nightstand. Lorraine, 1986. Caught mid-laugh at something out of frame, her hair lifted by the breeze off Lake Norman. They want to have me ruled incompetent, I told her barely above a whisper. My voice broke on it. I didn't try to fix that. Nobody was listening anyway. Our boy is letting it happen, Lori. Not standing up, not walking away, just letting it happen. I pressed my knuckles against my lips and held them there, a moment pulled in a breath. Then, I pushed myself upright, smoothed my shirt, and took the notepad from beside the lamp. I wrote down 1:14 p.m. Then I wrote out what I'd overheard as faithfully as memory would carry it. Corinne's voice, the talk of the next car, the conservatorship, the house, every piece. After that, I got up, crossed to the bathroom, and ran cold water over my face until I could meet my own reflection. One eye, 72 years. A sickness working through my throat, and a trap being constructed around me while I lay upstairs and listened. Not yet, I said to the man in the glass. The shaking had left my voice. Not even close to yet. I have never once in my life let a doctor's appointment go without calling to cancel it myself. People may not think that amounts to much, but it does. I'm 72 years old. I came up at a time when showing up was understood to be a form of basic courtesy to the doctor, to the nurses holding the whole schedule together, to the simple reality that someone had set aside time from their day on your account. My father made a 40-minute drive each way to his appointments in a truck that had never seen air conditioning. He was never late once. That is what he passed to me. Same as his jaw, same as his stubbornness, same as his deep resistance to asking for help, until things had gone genuinely wrong. So, When I pushed through the sliding glass doors of Atrium Health's Carolinas Medical Center on that last Thursday of April, and the receptionist raised her eyes to me with a look pulled between apology and unease, the cold moved through me before a single syllable left her mouth. "Mr. Haley," she said, picking her words with care, "we show you as canceled for today." I planted both palms on the counter. I didn't cancel. She worked through her screen, a small frown forming. "A call came in yesterday afternoon. The caller said they were your son reaching out on your behalf. He told us you weren't well enough to make it in." My molars locked together hard enough to register in my temples. 2 slow breaths through my nose before I'd let myself speak. "My son has no authority to cancel my appointments," I said. "I am the patient. These decisions belong to me. I'd like to see Dr. Naji, please." "Of course, Mr. Haley. I'll get Patrice." "I'd like Dr. Naji directly," I said a second time, and something in how I said it. Some frequency you develop after you've been handled past the point of tolerance made her reach for the phone without another word. Patrice, Dr. and Naji's nurse, came out within 3 minutes. She was a sturdy woman in her 50s, close-cropped gray hair, carrying herself with the unhurried steadiness of someone who had watched a great deal of human trouble walk through those doors and had long since stopped flinching at any of it. One look at my face and she said, "Right this way, Mr. Haley. We'll put you in a room." Dr. Adeze Naji was 48 years old. Nigerian-American reading glasses riding up on her forehead, with the kind of plain-spoken directness I had come to lean on, the way a builder leans on a level, no flattery in it, just true. She walked into the examination room, took my hand in a firm grip, and pulled a chair up across from mine. "This, tell me what happened," she said. "Not how are you doing, not let's run through your vitals. Tell me what happened." 2 years in, I still felt the rightness of having picked her. I laid it out for her, not the full account not yet, but the bones of it, the canceled appointment, the money moving out of the bank, the conversation between Nathan and Corinne that had come up through my bedroom floor. I talked the way I used to work through an engine problem, piece by piece in order, because coming apart in that examination room wasn't going to serve anyone, myself, least of all. But by the time I reached the end, my hands were going on my knees, and there was nothing I could do about it. Dr. Naji sat with everything I gave her and said nothing until I was done. Then she brought her glasses down from her forehead, held them loosely, and looked at me with an expression, I want to be exact about it, was not pity. I couldn't have endured pity. It was recognition. "Mr. Haley," she said, "there is a name for what you're describing, financial elder abuse. It ranks among the most widespread forms of mistreatment targeting older Americans. Federal data puts it in the millions of cases annually, and in the majority of those cases, the person responsible is a family member." She let that settle. "Your son canceling your appointment without your knowledge is not a minor thing. Under HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, you alone direct your medical care, unless you have executed a document that transfers that authority to another party. Have you done that? Absolutely not." "Good." She leaned toward me. "Then here's what we do right now. I'm documenting in your chart that this appointment was canceled by someone who had no authorization to do, so that you came in regardless, and that you present as fully alert-oriented and capable of making every decision that concerns you." Her eyes held mine. "That record could carry weight down the road. Are you following what I'm saying?" Something moved in my chest, not the grief I'd grown used to, something different. Relief. The kind that reaches you when you've been hauling a weight by yourself for too long, and another person steps in and takes part of it without being asked. My eyes went hot. I pressed through it. "I follow you," I said. "Thank you, Adaz." She almost smiled. She had treated me for 2 years, and I had never once called her that. "Do you have an attorney, Mr. Haley? Someone who handles elder law? Or—" "Not yet." She pulled her prescription pad over, wrote out a name and a number in her neat, unhurried hand, and pushed it across to me. "Cedric Beaumont. He's one of the best elder law attorneys in Davidson County. He handles financial abuse cases, estate protection, and conservatorship defense." She tapped the slip of paper. "Call him before your son does." I picked it up. My hand had steadied. "Conservatorship defense?" I said, turning the phrase over. "You think they're actually moving that way based on what I've told you?" "Yes." No hedging in her voice, no softening. "They'll work to show that you can't manage your own affairs. Our job is to make that as hard as possible for them." She rose and offered her hand again. 2 weeks come back, and I'll handle the rescheduling personally." I shook it, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel like the only person in Charlotte who was watching what was happening. I walked out of Atrium Health's Carolinas Medical Center into the April sun. The folded paper sat in my shirt pocket, pressing against my chest, and I stopped on the sidewalk and turned my face up toward the warmth of it for just a moment. Then I said quietly to nobody in particular, and to Lorraine specifically, "All right, now we move." Ruben Cisneros has lived on the other side of my fence for 26 years, and in all that time, the man has never once appeared at my door to lodge a complaint. Not when my oak tree heaved branches across his yard after the 2009 ice storm. Not when Lorraine's porch fan kept him awake 2 summers running. Not when I ran my shop grinder at 7 on a Saturday morning because a part needed finishing, and I had lost track of what day it was. Ruben Cisneros is a rare kind of neighbor. One who grasps that decades of proximity works best when both parties mostly leave each other alone and show up without being asked when something genuinely requires it. He'd come to my side of the fence twice in the past month, carrying my misdelivered mail, which our carrier scrambled from time to time. Both times he had let his eyes drift toward my house with an expression I can read now for what it was, a man who had noticed something and was giving me the first chance to bring it up myself. That first Tuesday of May, I walked over under the excuse of returning a rake I'd had since March. Ruben was on his back porch with a glass of lemonade watching a pair of starlings argue over his bird bath, with the easy attention of a man who has no pressing obligations and counts that as a kind of fortune. "Vernon," he lifted his glass. "Rake made it through the winter, I see." "I'm barely," I said. "You got a minute?" "I've got several." He nudged the chair across from him with his foot. "Sit yourself down before you go over. You look like a man who hasn't closed his eyes in a week." 2 weeks, I said and sat. Ruben Cisneros is 68 years old, Puerto Rican-American former electrician, retired since his knees gave out 4 years ago. He has worn the same gray mustache since 1988. His laugh begins somewhere around his belt buckle, and he carries the particular kind of judgment that belongs to men who spent their working lives around things that would kill them if their attention wandered. We had never been the type of friends who talked about what was going on inside us. We were the kind who helped each other drag refrigerators across floors and never needed to explain why. "Your boy's been keeping himself occupied." Ruben said no, preamble eyes still on the birds. His voice had the measured, careful quality of someone who has sat on something long enough and has finally decided to put it down. My stomach went tight. "What do you mean by that?" Ruben turned and met my eyes directly, his expression steady and serious. "Vernon, I put a security camera system in last fall after that break-in 3 streets over. You remember the Hendersons had their whole garage cleaned out." He tilted his head toward the side of the house. "Camera up on the eave there covers my driveway and the side yard. It also takes in about half your garage door and the path that runs alongside your house." The hair on the back of my neck stood up. How much did it take in Ruben? He got to his feet without a word and motioned me inside. Ruben's house is the exact floor plan of mine lived in differently. His kitchen carried the smell of coffee and the faint, clean grease scent of a man who still gets into small engines for the pleasure of it. He lifted a laptop from the counter, set it on the table between us, and dropped into the chair beside me. "I want you to understand something," he said, opening the lid. "I wasn't watching for this. I go through the footage every few days looking for the raccoon that keeps getting into my trash. I came across this by accident." He glanced at me sideways. "I've spent 2 weeks trying to work out how to bring it to you." He hit play. The timestamp read April 14th, 11:47 at night. Black and white, the night vision washing everything into a gray underwater stillness. The side of my house was visible, the concrete path beside the garage door itself. Not sharp, but plain enough. A figure came into the frame. Tall, broad through the shoulders, moving with purpose but no noise, the unhurried quiet of someone who believes no one is watching. He reached the garage door, which I had been certain was locked, and it opened, which told me he'd found the spare key, the one in the tin box. My chest locked up tight. The figure stepped inside. Ruben fast-forwarded. 8 minutes and 40 seconds later, the figure came back out, and in his right hand carried close to his side, like something fragile, was a manila envelope the size of the one I kept my duplicate property insurance documents in, filed in the second drawer of the garage cabinet. April 19th. Ruben said low and opened a second clip. 12:22 in the morning. same figure, same careful, unhurried movement this time, with a small flashlight held near the ground. He was inside 11 minutes. When he came out, he was carrying what appeared to be a folded sheaf of papers, thick pressed flat against his forearm. I knew at once what those were. A duplicate of my home's deed and the original mortgage satisfaction letter from 2002. The document that established the house was paid off, owned outright, free and clear. I had stored it in that cabinet for 20 years because keeping a second copy in the garage struck me as sensible. It had never crossed my mind to guard it from my own son. Both my hands were shaking badly now. I pressed them flat on Ruben's kitchen table and stared at the frozen image on the screen. "And that's Nathan," I said. My voice came out rough like something had scraped across it. "That's my son." "I know who it is, Vernon." Ruben's voice carried no judgment in it, only the quiet steadiness of a man who knows that facts are what they are, and wrapping them differently changes nothing. "I'm sorry." I gave one nod and swallowed hard against the heat rising in my throat, which had nothing to do with the cancer. I was not going to sit at Ruben Cisneros' kitchen table and weep. I had done my crying at home, and that was the right place for it. "Can you copy that footage?" I asked. "Already done." He reached into the kitchen drawer and placed a small black USB drive on the table in front of me. Both clips time-stamped original file format. I didn't touch or alter anything. He paused. "In North Carolina, unaltered security footage from a private residence capturing activity visible from that property is fully admissible in civil proceedings." He looked at me squarely. "My nephew practices law in Raleigh. I called him before I called you." For a moment, I had no words at all. This man who had never once knocked on my door to register a grievance in 26 years had spent 2 weeks quietly researching North Carolina evidentiary law on my behalf, without saying a word, without asking for a thing in return. "Ruben," I started. "Don't," he said flat and final, and slid the drive toward me. "You'd have done the same. Take it where it needs to go." I picked up the drive. It weighed next to nothing. It held everything. "I'm going to see a lawyer Friday," I said. Ruben nodded and stood. The conversation done the way conversations between men like us end no ceremony required. He walked me to the back door and held it, and as I stepped out into the May afternoon, he said the only other thing he said about any of it. "Vernon, whatever you've got in mind, don't let it sit too long. Men like your son don't ease up on their own." I looked at the drive in my palm. Then I looked up at my friend of 26 years. "I'm not planning on waiting," I said. Cedric Beaumont's office occupied the 4th floor of a building on Trade Street in downtown Charlotte, 11 minutes from Atrium Health's Carolinas Medical Center by Surface Road, if the lights cooperated. I had called him the morning after Ruben handed me that drive. What I was about to find out wasn't just uncomfortable. It was the kind of discovery that rewires the way a man sees his own life. Every decision he made, every time he said yes when he should have said no. Before I get there, I want to ask you if you suspected someone close to you was quietly working against you. Would you confront them directly, or would you go silent and start building your case? He picked up on the second ring, his voice carrying the easy alertness of a man who had been up for hours and didn't mind. I told him Dr. Naji had sent me his way. He said, "Come in Friday at 9. Bring whatever you've got." No small talk, no forms to fill out over the phone, no preliminary audition to determine whether my situation merited his attention. I took to that immediately the same way I take to a good torque wrench. Direct, dependable, nothing wasted. His office was understated for a man with his standing. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a desk the size of a dining room table, buried under sorted stacks of folders. A window with a view of Lake Norman that he clearly ignored because his chair was pointed at the door. Cedric Beaumont was 61 years old, a lean black man with close-cropped silver hair, and a particular economy of movement, the kind that develops in a person who has figured out that going still makes other people fill the silence. He shook my hand, gestured at the chair across from him, and said, "Start at the beginning. I'll interrupt if I need to." I started in October. I spoke for 22 minutes. Beaumont filled 3 pages of a yellow legal pad in handwriting, too small to read from where I sat. And he stopped me exactly 4 times, once to get the name of the bank, once to confirm Nathan had never been listed as an authorized user on the account, once to ask whether I had ever put my signature on anything granting Nathan medical or financial authority, and once when I described the tin box in the garage to set down his pen and give me a look that crossed from professional attention into something harder. He entered your private property storage after dark without your knowledge or consent, Beaumont said. And you have time-stamped video of both incidents. I placed the USB drive on his desk. He studied it. Then he studied me. Mr. Haley, what you've laid out constitutes financial elder abuse under North Carolina law. The exploitation of a vulnerable adult. The unauthorized withdrawals alone, 9 transactions totaling over $8,000 plus the $14,000 vehicle purchase, represent actionable civil fraud. The nighttime entry into your property and the removal of documents adds potential criminal exposure for your son. He took his pen back up. Before we talk about what comes next, I need to ask you something, and the answer has to be completely straight. I haven't been anything but straight in 72 years, I said. I'm not about to change that. The corner of his mouth moved. Is there anything your son could turn around and use against you? Something you signed, a conversation that might be read as permission for any of this? Or po su decorum sens pastor? No, I said. But there is something he doesn't know exists. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and drew out a manila envelope. Old, the flap reinforced with a strip of packing tape gone yellow at the edges. I laid it on his desk. I'd like you to look at this. Beaumont opened the envelope with care and slid the contents out. He read without speaking for roughly 90 seconds, and I watched his face the way I used to watch a pressure gauge when I was testing a repaired engine, waiting for the needle to settle somewhere that told me whether the work had held. The needle moved. He raised his eyes from the papers, wearing an expression I hadn't seen on him yet. Something close to surprise. On a man built the way he was, surprise registered like a weather event. Mr. Haley, he said, you established a revocable living trust 4 years ago. The week after my wife's funeral, I said. She never said it once she said it until it became the way I breathed. A man's papers are his backbone. I'd been living by that long before I understood I might need it to protect myself from my own son. He set the papers down carefully, both palms flat on either side of them. This trust places your primary residence, your medical savings account, and your investment portfolio under trust protection, which means he held the papers steady. Your son cannot access, encumber, or lay claim to any of these assets without your explicit written authorization as the trustee. A conservatorship petition filed against you would not automatically override a properly established trust under North Carolina law. He would need a separate court order targeted specifically at trust assets, and that requires a substantially higher burden of proof. Something came loose inside my chest, a tightness I'd been carrying for months, maybe longer, building so slowly I'd forgotten when it began. My eyes went hot. I pressed my lips together, looked past him to the window, and the silver line of Lake Norman beyond the glass. Your son has no idea this document exists, does he? Beaumont asked. No. My voice came out heavier than I meant it to. I cleared my throat. I never told him. I didn't think I'd need it to keep him out. I thought I was protecting my estate from probate complications. I stopped. I was wrong about what I was protecting it from. Beaumont held his silence for a moment. Not the uncomfortable kind, but the productive kind, the kind where a mind is sorting pieces into an order that holds. Then he pulled a fresh legal pad in front of him. Here is what we're going to do, he said, and here is the sequence we're going to do it in. He walked me through 3 tracks documentation of my knowledge timeline to establish good faith preparation of civil fraud filings and conservatorship defense. He spoke plainly the way a man speaks when he respects the person across the desk, enough not to hide behind the language of his profession. My hand moved across my own notepad, keeping pace, and for the first time in months, I felt something I recognized from a long way off. The sensation of having the right tools in hand for the job sitting in front of me. When I rose to leave, Beaumont stood with me and shook my hand a second time. Steady grip, no hurry. Mr. Haley, he said, your son made a serious miscalculation. What's that? I asked. He assumed that because you trusted him, you hadn't prepared for the chance that he might not be worth it. He looked at me without looking away. In my experience, the people who prepare quietly are always the most dangerous opponents once you get into a courtroom. I took my hat from the chair. My chest felt open and clear, the way the air goes after a hard rain moves through. I built engines for 40 years, I said. I always kept the spare parts. 2 weeks after I walked out of Beaumont's office, Nathan sat me down in my own living room. He had been working up to it the whole day. I could feel it coming, the way you feel a pressure change ahead of a storm, that particular stillness in the air When everything in your body recognizes something is on its way before your mind has given it a name. He had been attentive at dinner in a way that wasn't like him, topping off my water glass twice, asking about my treatment side effects, with the precise kind of interest that belongs to a man who has looked up the right questions ahead of time. Corinne had cleared the dishes without being asked, which in 3 months of living under my roof had never once happened. When Nathan said, "Dad, can we sit down and talk?" my stomach dropped before he had finished the sentence. I settled into my armchair. Nathan took the couch. Corinne moved to the corner chair, phone face up in her lap, not looking at it, listening. "I've been worried about you." Nathan's voice was measured and warm, the voice of a man who has rehearsed something until the stitching stopped showing. "The treatments are taking a real toll. I watch it every day. You tire out faster. You forget things sometimes." "What things?" I asked. My tone came out quiet and level, the same register I used when a supplier tried to tell me a part was within spec, and I could see with my one good eye that it wasn't. Nathan blinked. "Just small stuff. Where you've put your keys, appointments." "I drove myself to every appointment for 8 months before you got here," I said. "The one I missed because someone canceled it on my behalf, without my knowledge." Something crossed his face and was gone before it finished forming. "Dad, I was trying to help. You were exhausted that week." "I was not exhausted that week," I said, keeping my voice pleasant. "I was fine that week, but let's hear the rest of what you came to say." Nathan exhaled, leaned forward, and reached into the messenger bag propped against the couch. He came out with a tidy stack of papers held together by a clip and placed them on the coffee table between us, rotating them so they faced me. "It's a legal document," he said. "Standard arrangement. Plenty of people put these in place when they're dealing with a serious illness. It would let me step in on the financial side, bill payments, insurance claims, the medical account. So you're not carrying all of that by yourself." I picked up the papers and read the way I read anything that carries weight, not scanning for the broad shape of it, but working line by line, the way you drag your hand across a metal surface hunting for the place it's given out. By the 3rd page, my jaw had clenched to the point of aching, and I was holding the papers steady through nothing but will. This was not a standard power of attorney. That's a legal instrument in which one person, the principal, grants another specific defined authority to act on their behalf. Authority the principal can take back whenever they choose. Serious enough on its own. What Nathan had laid in front of me was a limited conservatorship petition, a court filing that if a North Carolina probate judge approved, it would hand legal control of my financial affairs to Nathan. Not because I had chosen to give it, because a court had ruled I was incapable of holding it myself. A conservatorship, unlike a power of attorney, cannot be undone by the person it covers. Ending it requires a separate court proceeding. And it isn't started by the protected person, it's started by someone who claims that person requires protection. Nathan wasn't asking me to hand him authority. He was asking me to agree to let a judge take it from me and give it to him. "Who drew this up?" I asked. My voice came out steady in a way I didn't fully understand. "A lawyer Corinne knows," Nathan said. "Family friend, he specializes in elder care planning." "This isn't elder care planning," I said, and set the papers on the coffee table with a precision that cost me something. "This is a limited conservatorship petition. Do you know what separates this from a power of attorney?" Nathan's jaw shifted. "Dad, a power of attorney, I can revoke it any time I want," I said. "A conservatorship, once a court hands it down, I cannot undo without going back before a judge and demonstrating I shouldn't have needed one in the first place. This document doesn't give you the ability to help me. It gives a probate judge the authority to decide whether I'm capable of running my own life." I looked at my son across that table. My chest was burning with a grief so vast it had its own climate. "Is that what you believe about me, Nathan? That I need a court to manage my affairs?" "O said ben nespos bidao was stickable." Nathan leaned forward, eyes earnest, and visibly pained in a way that might have undone me 3 months earlier. "Dad, I'm trying to look out for you. You're sick. You're on your own. I can't stand the thought of something happening and finding out we had no way to step in. I am not on my own," I said. "I have a doctor, a lawyer, and 26 years of a neighbor who has never once failed to show up. What I have, it turns out, is more than enough." I lifted the papers, squared the edges carefully, and held them out toward him. "I'm going to read through these tonight." His shoulders came down with relief. He took that for a yes. Corinne's phone tilted barely, but it tilted. She had been watching my face over the screen the entire time, and now something in her expression released a fraction. They both believed the old man had given in. I said, "Goodnight," stood and went upstairs with the papers tucked under my arm. I sat on the edge of the bed, and for a moment my hands were shaking so badly I had to press them between my knees. The grief was immense, not fear, not anger. Grief clean and specific. The grief of a father sitting with a document his son had prepared to strip him of his own standing in the eyes of the law. I reached for my phone and called Beaumont. He answered on the second ring, same unhurried voice. I read him the key sections out loud, line by line. When I finished, a pause opened between us. The pause of a man who has confirmed precisely what he anticipated and finds no comfort in being right. "Vernon," he said, "they're not just after your money anymore. They're after your name." I looked at Lorraine's photo on the nightstand, her laugh frozen in 1986. Not yet, I told her, and told him, and told myself. I am not done yet. June was the month I became an actor. Nothing glamorous about the part, a sick old man who moved slowly, misplaced things, leaned on his son for everything got turned around by paperwork. I had watched enough men write me off across 40 years of contract negotiations and shop floor disputes to know precisely how a person looks when they've decided the one sitting across from them is no longer worth taking seriously. I was going to give Nathan and Corinne every reason to reach that conclusion, while Cedric Beaumont quietly constructed the case that would dismantle everything they believed they'd already secured. The first performance came on a Tuesday morning in June. I came downstairs moving slower than I had, to one hand trailing the wall, blinking like a man whose eyes hadn't caught up with the morning yet. Nathan was at the kitchen table with his laptop and glanced up wearing that rehearsed concern that had begun to feel like a sound you can't stop hearing. "And Dad, you all right? You look pale." "I'm just tired," I said, lowering into the chair with a small grunt. I didn't need to invent. Treatment fatigue was genuine, and I borrowed from it freely. I keep forgetting the evening pill. I couldn't remember last night whether I'd taken it or not. Something lit up briefly behind Nathan's eyes before he got it under control. He didn't quite manage it in time. "I can help you track that, Dad. One of those weekly pill organizers might do the trick." "That would be nice," I said, and watched him pull out his phone to order one on the spot. He was smiling. He thought he had momentum. What he didn't know was that I had taken every pill on schedule for 8 months and had no plans to stop. But a man who loses track of his medication is a man who might need help managing larger things. I was feeding him the story he needed, one small detail at a time, because a machine that thinks it's winning stops looking for the leak. The bank visit was June 12th. Nathan had been working toward it for weeks, casual offers always cloaked in concern. I said yes, which made him so visibly pleased that something in my gut turned over hard. We drove to First Carolina's bank, and I walked in leaning on the cane I'd pulled from the hall closet. I hadn't needed that cane in 2 years. It played well. At the teller window, Nathan moved up beside me with the easy assumption of a man who expected to handle the conversation. The branch manager, a woman named Brenda, reading glasses on a beaded chain, greeted me by name and asked how I was getting along. "Having a good day," I said warmly. "My son wanted to come along. He's been helping me with things." Nathan smiled at Brenda and said, "I was hoping we could look at adding me to Dad's primary account just to help with bill payments and transfers while he's going through treatment." Brenda looked at me. "Mr. Haley, would you like to add an authorized user to your account?" I took the pen she offered. I signed, but with my right hand positioned slightly differently from my registered signature on file. Index finger angled 2 degrees off my usual grip. The result looked genuine enough to a layman, but any forensic document examiner setting it beside my registered sample would flag the difference. Beaumont had told me that an improperly executed signature on a bank authorization could render the document legally void. I had spent a week practicing the variation. Brenda processed the paperwork. Nathan drove home in a noticeably good mood, one hand loose on the steering wheel, already talking about how he could simplify things for me. I watched the June green of Charlotte move past the window and kept my face easy and grateful and gave nothing away. That evening, I called Beaumont from my bedroom with the door locked. "The bank visit happened today," I said. "How did it go?" He tried to get himself added to the primary account. I signed with the variation we discussed. A pause. Then Beaumont made a sound of quiet satisfaction. "Good. Brenda will submit it for processing, and it'll come back flagged within 10 business days. At that point, the bank's fraud prevention protocol takes over. They'll reach out to you directly as the account holder of record to confirm the authorization. You decline, the addition gets rejected, and we have documented proof that Nathan attempted to gain unauthorized access to the account with your apparent but legally void consent. And the conservatorship petition I asked, filed with the court last week by Nathan's attorney. We received service of process this morning. His voice was level and untroubled, the voice of a man who had been waiting for exactly this. Our response is ready. Dr. Nanaji's cognitive evaluation is complete and on file. The trust documentation is authenticated. The USB footage from Mr. Cisneros has been submitted as supporting evidence. A brief pause. Vernon, I need you to hear this clearly. They filed this petition believing you hadn't seen it coming. They were wrong. We are not running behind them. We are ahead of them. My throat clenched so hard, I had to press my fist to my sternum and work through it breath by breath. I was not going to weep on a call with my attorney. I had set that rule for myself, and I meant to hold it. Cedric, I said when my voice came back to me. When do we move? Soon, he said. I want Nathan to take one more step, something unambiguous, something that can't be explained away once it's in front of a judge. The patience in his voice wasn't hesitation. It was craft. Let him believe he's nearly there. Let him settle in. Men who think they're winning get careless. After the call, I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at Lorraine's Bible on the nightstand, the one with her blue marking pen lines in the margins, the one tucked inside Lorraine's knitting bag in the closet, alongside a folded legal pad covered in 9 months of evidence in my own hand. Not long now, Lori, I said quietly. My voice only broke once right at the end, right on her name. Not long now. The 4th of July came and passed quietly on Maple Run Lane. No cookout that year. Lorraine was the one who had loved the holidays, made potato salad from scratch, got the flag on the porch railing before the rest of the street was awake and wouldn't come inside until the last neighborhood firework faded out over the tree line. Without her, the day felt like a sentence with its subject removed. Nathan and Corinne drove off to a party at someone's house, friends of Corinne's, a name I didn't know. I spent the evening alone on the back porch with a glass of lemonade and the oak tree, and the far-off sound of things going off in the dark. I was not in the mood to celebrate. The text came on the morning of July 5th at 7:43. I was still in my bathrobe, first cup of coffee in hand, when my phone buzzed against the kitchen table. First, Carolina's bank transaction alert. I had put alerts on every account 3 weeks earlier, Beaumont's suggestion one of a dozen quiet preparations Nathan knew nothing about. The alert read, withdrawal confirmed. Amount, $11,800. Account Haley Vi Personal Savings. Reference auto dealership purchase. I set my cup down, picked it back up, drank half of it standing at the counter because my legs needed something to occupy them. $11,800, a second car. Corinne had said it herself. Up through my bedroom ceiling on that April afternoon, Gerald already picked out the color for the next one. I had written that down. I had told Beaumont, and Beaumont had said, let it happen. One more unauthorized transaction on the record court, stamped undeniable. He wanted it documented, not stopped. One more car bought on my money meant one more count on their file. So, I had waited. I had watched. And I had let them take it because sometimes the only way to stop a man from stealing is to let him finish and hand what he's done to a judge. I had the date, the time, the exact words. Now I had the transaction. I went upstairs, showered and put on my good clothes. The gray slacks, the blue button-down, Lorraine always said, made my eye look sharp. Then I drove out to the address I had located 3 weeks earlier through a county property record search. Corinne had mentioned her parents' neighborhood once in passing, the kind of detail that slips out when you've stopped accounting for who might be paying attention. I had been paying attention. I had written it down. The Tolliver house was in Waxhaw, 12 miles south of Charlotte, a suburb that had spent 20 years becoming the kind of place where the driveways run wider than some people's living rooms. I came down their street at 9:15 in the morning, one hand easy on the wheel, and I picked out the vehicle before I reached the house. A silver SUV at the top of the driveway, still wearing dealer paper plates. Rear window sticker, Carolina Auto Group. A name I recognized because I had seen it in the transaction references on 3 of the 9 smaller withdrawals from last fall. My throat closed up. Not grief this time. Something colder, the particular sensation of watching a pattern close itself off, of seeing the last component of a broken machine settle into position and grasping finally the complete shape of what had been taken from you. I pulled over 2 houses, drew out my phone, and photographed the SUV from where I sat. Dealer sticker, clear. Paper plates, clear. House number visible on the mailbox at the edge of the frame. Then Gerald Tolliver came out the front door. Big man, mid-60s, the kind who had been sharp-looking in a blunt way, and had grown into the sort of older man who fills a room without apology. He came down the porch steps in a polo shirt and khakis, already pulling his phone out, and crossed to the silver SUV with the easy ownership of a man who has already settled in his mind that something belongs to him. He walked a slow circle around it, ran his palm along the hood, patted the roof, then stood in the driveway talking on his phone, laughing at something, one hand on his hip. He had no idea who was parked 2 houses away watching him. My chest ached with a fury I had to breathe through deliberately, in and out. That was my money standing on that driveway. Those were my treatments, my radiation sessions, my appointments, the carefully accumulated labor of decades being admired by a man who had probably never spent a single morning wondering where the next dollar was coming from. I photographed Gerald Tolliver with the SUV in the same frame. I photographed the dealer sticker at close range. I photographed the paper plates. Then I drove back to Charlotte, pulled into my own driveway, and called Beaumont before the engine was off. He answered on the first ring. I told him what I'd found, what I'd photographed, the transaction amount, the dealership name matching the earlier withdrawal references. "Send me everything," he said. His voice had a quality I hadn't heard from him before. Not urgency precisely, but the focused attention of a man who has watched the finish line come into view. "Mr. Haley, with this second vehicle purchase, your total documented losses stand at 37,340s. That is well beyond the threshold for felony elder financial abuse under North Carolina law." A brief pause. "We have enough. The civil filing is ready. The criminal referral documentation is ready. The conservatorship defense is ready." Another pause, shorter. "The question now is when you want to move." My hand was trembling against the phone, not from weakness, but from the particular physical force of relief after a long run of sustained dread. The way a fist opens after gripping something too tightly for too long. "I want to wait for one more thing," I said. "I want Nathan to file that conservatorship formally with the court himself. I want his name on it, his signature, his claim on the record that his father cannot manage his own affairs." My voice came out more steady than I had any right to expect. "And then I want to stand up in that courtroom and show exactly how well I've been managing." Beaumont was quiet for a moment. Then he said something I hadn't anticipated. "Vernon, I've been doing this work for 31 years. I want you to understand what you've put together here. The documentation, the preparation, the patience." A pause. "I've had clients with full teams behind them who didn't build a case this solid. You did this alone." My eyes burned hard, and I pressed the back of my wrist against them. I was not going to cry in my own driveway in my good clothes at 9:45 in the morning. "I had a good teacher," I said. My voice came apart slightly on the last word. "She always said, keep your papers in order." I hung up and sat in the quiet of my truck in the driveway of the house Lorraine and I had paid off together 30 years ago. Then I went inside, changed out of my good clothes, and made a second cup of coffee. The machine had shown me where it had failed. Now I knew precisely which bolt to tighten last. Charlotte in August is a physical thing, heat that settles on your shoulders the moment you step outside, shimmering off every surface until the whole world looks unsteady. By 10 in the morning, any creature with sense has retreated indoors, and that's where they stay until the evening loosens its grip somewhere around 8. I had spent most of that month shuttling between the kitchen and the back porch, watching the oak stand motionless in the dead air, taking in more iced tea than I probably had in the last 10 years put together. Nathan had been cheerful, all month long, relentlessly cheerful. I knew what that meant. When my son believes things are breaking his way, something loosens in him, he smiles easier, volunteers for things nobody asked him to do. He patched the loose hinge on the screen door off his own back. He showed up 3 times in 2 weeks with barbecue from my favorite place on Brookshire Road. In machine shop terms, he was running hot, burning more fuel than the task demanded, which in my experience means something is pressurizing deep in the works where you can't put your eyes on it. The Mecklenburg County probate court envelope came on a Thursday. I was the one who walked to the mailbox and pulled it out, which was either good timing or something more deliberate watching over me, because if Nathan had intercepted it first, I doubt it would have reached me by the straightest road. Court return address, upper left corner. My name centered on the front in clean type, Vernon Dale, Haley 4417 Maple Run Lane, Charlotte, North Carolina, 3729. I brought it to the kitchen table, set it down, poured a cup of coffee I never touched, and lowered myself into the chair. Inside was the official petition for conservatorship of person and estate filed with Mecklenburg County Probate Court, Nathan Roy Haley, listed as petitioner, Vernon Dale Haley as respondent. 11 pages. Nathan's lawyer, one Alton Griffin, a man whose firm advertised itself on the letterhead as specialists in elder law and estate planning. And I noticed the irony, believe me, had done his homework. The petition laid it out plainly. I was showing signs of cognitive decline. I could no longer manage my own finances without assistance. I had a demonstrable history of confusion around medications and appointments, and the court's protection was required for my own good. Each and every one of those claims led straight back to a part I had played, the pill I pretended to forget. The appointment Nathan had canceled while I stood there and said nothing. The afternoon at the bank with a cane I had no business carrying. I sat there with both hands flat on the table, reading the case my son had assembled from the props I handed him. What rose in my chest wasn't simply rage, and it wasn't simply grief. It was that particular compound of the two that forms when a man is turned into a weapon aimed at himself. The coffee was cold before I thought to reach for it. I left it. I called Beaumont instead. He'd already received his copy of the service papers that morning, he said. The response was drafted and waiting. Come Monday, he told me. His voice had the quality of water in a deep well. No current, no disturbance. This was, he said, precisely the moment we had been building toward. I drove to Atrium Health's Carolina's Medical Center that same afternoon. Dr. Inaji's waiting area held the smell I had learned over 8 months to associate with a particular species of dread. Industrial cleaner cutting through the must of aging magazines, the scent of a room where people sit in plastic chairs, bracing for news about their own bodies. Patrice called me back before I'd even gotten comfortable in my seat. Dr. Nanaji was on her feet when I stepped through the door. That was off. Her habit was to be seated at the desk, already going through my file when I arrived. This time she was at the window, arms folded across her chest. When she turned, her face carried something that told me plainly she had already seen the petition. "Vernon, sit down," she said. There was a quality in her voice she generally kept out of clinical settings, something that felt almost like care. I sat. My legs appreciated it. The drive and the August air and the weight of the morning had settled into my joints in a way I preferred not to think about. "The court sent me documentation this morning," she said. "My name is on it, potential witness for the opposing side." She dropped her arms and came to sit directly across from me, elbows on knees, leaning in. "I need to say this to your face, Vernon. For 8 months, I have kept a record of your cognitive status, every appointment, every assessment, every exchange between us. You are among the sharpest people I treat. Your memory holds, your thinking is sound. When it comes to judgment and decision-making, you don't just meet the standard, you exceed it." Something moved through her voice, tightened it. "What's in that petition has no basis in medical fact. I will be stating that on the record." My throat locked. Heat pressed hard behind my eyes. I set my jaw and made myself look at the ceiling for a beat. Because I was not going to break down in Dr. Naji's exam room, that was a rule I had made, and I was keeping it even as every other rule got harder to hold. "A days," I said, and my voice had gone to gravel. "I can't tell you what it does to me hearing you say that." "I think I have some idea," she said, soft and even. She crossed to her desk and came back carrying a thick folder. "I've put together an independent cognitive evaluation, 12 pages built on the standardized assessment protocols the North Carolina court system uses, and countersigned by a neuropsychologist colleague of mine at Atrium Health, who ran a separate evaluation last week." She laid it on the table between us. Vernon Dale Haley, fully oriented to person, place, time, and situation. No evidence of dementia, cognitive impairment, or any reduction in decision-making capacity. Recommendation: respondent is fully competent to manage his own affairs. She slid it toward me. I set my palm on the cover and held it there. 12 pages with the weight of a verdict. The tears I had been carrying since morning finally gave way. Not a collapse, just 2 drops. I couldn't hold back, moving down the left side of my face while my right fist pressed against my mouth. "I'm sorry," I said. "Don't you dare apologize," Dr. Niji said, and the warmth in it broke something loose in my chest. "You have carried this by yourself for months. You are allowed 2 tears. She rose and put out her hand. "Beaumont gets the evaluation today. The court receives it before the week is out. I shook it. My hand didn't waver. My eyes still stung. Once this is finished, I told her, I'm going to bring you the best sweet potato pie in Charlotte. She laughed, genuine, caught off guard by it, bright and unguarded. I'm gonna hold you to that, Mr. Haley. I pushed out through the doors of Atrium Health's Carolina's Medical Center into the August wall of heat, tilted my face toward a sky gone white with it, and pulled the thick, hot air of that city into my lungs. It was still mine. Despite all of it, still mine. Nathan believed he had set a snare. He had actually handed me the keys to the courtroom. September arrived in Charlotte the way a second shift worker shows up. Quiet, deliberate, relieving something that had gone on too long. The heat didn't vanish, but it backed off enough that the oak trees showed their first pale gold at the edges. And the morning light came in differently, less like punishment, more like an opening. I hadn't slept properly in months. That first September morning, I came awake at 4:30, lay still in the dark for 15 minutes, while the house settled around me, then swung my legs over, dressed with care, put the coffee on, and drove into town to reach Cedric Beaumont's office before the lobby crew had gotten through their first cup. He was at his desk already. The man's hours suggested either a calling that bordered on obsession or a home situation he'd rather not return to. I had never pressed him on it either way. Good morning, Vernon. He stood, offered his hand, waved me toward the chair. Ready. Been ready since April, I said. He smiled at that, the full version all the way up to his eyes. I hadn't seen him smile that way before. Then let's get to it. He laid out the morning's plan the way a man does when he has rehearsed every step and has no intention of improvising. 3 stops. 3 things to accomplish. We'd move through them in sequence without rushing. First stop. First Carolina's Bank on Trade Street. Brenda was already at her post when we came through the door. Beaumont in his good suit, me in the blue button-down Lorraine always had a fondness for. Brenda looked up, clocked Beaumont with the antenna bank managers grow for attorneys, and stepped around the counter toward us. Mr. Haley, she said, warm. Mr. Beaumont, what can I do for you today? We need to close 2 accounts and open a new one, Beaumont said. We'll also be filing formal documentation of unauthorized transactions stretching back to October of last year. And I've brought a package for your fraud department. He placed his briefcase on the counter, drew out a folder, 3 inches thick. I'll want to sit down with whoever runs your elder financial abuse reporting protocol. Brenda's expression changed. Professional and focused, the look of someone who grasped the gravity of what had just been laid on the counter. Of course. Let me bring in the branch supervisor. While Beaumont worked through the fraud documentation with the supervisor, I settled in at Brenda's desk, and we moved through the account closures one by one. The checking account Nathan had tried to attach himself to closed. The savings account from which $37,340 had been pulled out closed. Every card tied to both accounts canceled on the spot. Then Brenda opened the paperwork for the new account. A single checking account. Sole ownership. Vernon Dale Haley only. No authorized users. No secondary signatories. Linked exclusively to a new debit card, set to be mailed to a P.O. box Beaumont had arranged the week before. And the medical savings fund, Brenda asked. That transfers today into the trust account, Beaumont said, from across the room, not lifting his eyes from his papers because the man caught everything. The trust was established 4 years ago. Transfer authorization is in the folder, page 17. Brenda located page 17, processed the transfer. The money I had accumulated across 40 years, the money that had been siphoned and plundered and treated like a common resource by people who had put nothing into it, moved into protected trust. In roughly 4 minutes and 30 seconds of keyboard work, I watched the screen as Brenda confirmed it complete. My hand sat flat on the desk in front of me. Not a tremor. I noticed that, and I was quietly glad for it. Everything looks good, Mr. Haley, Brenda said, and when she glanced up at me, her expression had traveled just past professional, the look of a woman who knew what she had just helped put right. Yes, I said, it does now. Second stop, Beaumont's office to execute the court response. We headed back downtown, and I took my seat across from Beaumont's desk once more, this time with a 37-page response document laid out before me, our answer to Nathan's conservatorship petition. The response carried Dr. Naji's 12-page cognitive evaluation, Ruben Cisneros' USB footage authenticated by a forensic digital media examiner, Beaumont had assembled 6 months of bank statements, with every unauthorized transaction flagged and cross-referenced. The trust document from 4 years back, authenticated and notarized. A timeline of my own knowledge dated entries going back to October, establishing exactly when I learned each piece of what had happened and what I did in response. Once you sign this, Beaumont said, it files electronically within the hour. At that point, nothing Nathan says to you in a conversation touches anything in the legal record. The court has it. It belongs to us. I picked up the pen. Beaumont kept good pens weighted balanced, the kind that run more than a lunch. I signed every page that called for my signature. And I signed with my full name, my actual signature, the one I had been putting on paper since I was 17 years old, and signed my first employment contract at the shop on Albemarle Road. Vernon Dale Haley. Unhurried, steady, not a single tremor. "Do you want to call Nathan?" Beaumont asked, watching me set the pen down. "No," I said. "Let the court tell him." Beaumont nodded, clicked send. Somewhere inside the Mecklenburg County probate court system, our response landed the way a stone does when it drops into quiet water. "The hearing is set for October 14th, Beaumont said. 6 weeks, we'll prepare." I stood, buttoned my jacket, took my hat. My body felt different from the way it had when I walked in that morning, lighter in some places, heavier in others. The precise physical sensation of a man who has been holding something at arm's length for a very long time and has finally set it down somewhere it belongs. "Cedric," I said, "when this is over, I owe you something beyond a lawyer's fee." He stood and put out his hand. "Win the hearing, Vernon. That's payment enough." I shook it and walked out into the September morning, and the air that came across my face was cool and clean and carried the smell of a beginning rather than an end. Nathan phoned me that afternoon, warm, easy, the same as always, asking how I was holding up, whether I needed him to pick up anything from the store. I told him I'd had a productive morning and was thinking of taking it easy. He said that sounded sensible. We had both told the truth. We had simply spent the morning in entirely different buildings doing entirely different kinds of work, and only one of us was aware of that. I put on the same suit I wore to Lorraine's funeral. It was the only one I owned that still fit properly, a charcoal gray wool blend I had bought at Belk in 2016 for an occasion I had hoped never to repeat in terms of grief, though I had understood even then that a man my age buys a funeral suit knowing he'll put it on more than once before he is the one in the box. I pressed it myself the night before, the iron moving in slow, deliberate passes the way Lorraine had taught me, and I hung it on the back of the bedroom door and stood looking at it in the dark for a long time before sleep finally came. The Mecklenburg County Courthouse was already moving when Beaumont and I arrived at 8:45. The probate courtroom was on the 3rd floor, dark wood paneling, fluorescent lighting that flattened everything into the hard, truthful quality of a photograph, taken without any flattering light. Beaumont had been through these doors enough times that the bailiff addressed him by name. I had never set foot in a courtroom in 72 years of living, and I want to be plain about what that felt like. It felt like standing at the edge of something with a real drop below you, but you have checked your gear 3 times over and you trust the rope. Nathan and Corinne were already at the petitioner's table when we came in. Nathan wore a dark suit, new I thought bought for this day. Corinne sat beside him in a charcoal blazer. Her posture arranged, her hands folded on the table, with the careful deliberateness of a woman performing composure rather than feeling it. Their attorney, Alton Griffin, was a tall man in his 50s, silver-haired, carrying the smooth and unhurried manner of someone who had won enough hearings to stop losing sleep over any of them. Nathan looked up when I walked in. I held his gaze. I didn't look away, didn't harden my face or soften it. I simply looked at my son across a courtroom and carried the full terrible weight of everything it had cost both of us to arrive in this room. Then I sat down next to Beaumont and faced forward. Judge Bernadette Lacombe took the bench at 9:00 exactly. She was in her early 60s, compact reading glasses on a chain, the manner of a woman who had heard every variation of every story and held on to her patience through professional discipline rather than any natural ease with human folly. She reviewed the case file for 90 seconds before she spoke. "This is the matter of Haley versus Haley," she said. "Petition for conservatorship of person and estate. Mr. Griffin, you may proceed." Alton Griffin rose without hurrying. He laid out Nathan's case in orderly, sympathetic terms: a devoted son, a seriously ill father, the warning signs of cognitive decline, a pattern of confusion around medications and money. He cited the canceled appointment. He cited the bank visit where Vernon had appeared uncertain. He cited 2 instances of supposed forgetfulness reported by Nathan directly. Every word of it hit me somewhere deep in the chest, because every word of it had been built from the theater I had performed, and hearing it spoken aloud in a courtroom formalized, submitted as truth, produced a particular kind of pain I hadn't fully anticipated. My hands on the table in front of me were absolutely steady. My throat was not. "Mr. Beaumont," Judge Lacombe said, "your response." Beaumont stood. He used no notes. "Your Honor," he said, "the petitioner has presented a narrative. We will present a record." He signaled to the clerk, who began distributing the response packet. The respondent, Vernon Dale Haley, is a 72-year-old retired mechanical engineer with a 40-year professional history, no prior legal proceedings of any kind, and a documented cognitive status independently evaluated by 2 licensed medical professionals within the past 60 days. He submitted Dr. Naji's evaluation, first 12 pages, the neuropsychologist's countersignature, the standardized assessment scores, fully oriented, no impairment, exceptional decision-making capacity. Griffin objected. Judge Lacombe overruled him with one word and a look that made clear she found the objection unpersuasive. Beaumont presented the bank statements next 6 months, every unauthorized transaction flagged and cross-referenced to dates when Nathan had physical access to Vernon's debit card. He presented the transfer records. He presented the vehicle purchase documentation, $37,340 moved without authorization from a 72-year-old cancer patient's medical savings account. Then he presented Ruben Cisneros' footage. The courtroom monitor played both clips. 11:47 at night, 12:22 in the morning, a figure moving through darkened rooms with a flashlight, pulling documents from a property he had no claim to at hours when the man who owned that property was asleep. Beaumont identified the figure by height, by build, and by the distinctive gray jacket matched against a photograph of Nathan Haley taken at a family gathering in March. Nathan's jaw was clenched so hard I could see the muscle jumping from across the room. Corinne had gone a particular shade of pale that had nothing to do with the overhead lighting. Alton Griffin was writing furiously on his legal pad. Then Beaumont placed the trust document before the bench. "Your Honor," he said, "the respondent established a revocable living trust protecting his primary residence, his medical savings, and his investment portfolio 4 years ago following the death of his wife. He did this on his own, without the petitioner's knowledge, and without informing the petitioner it existed. That is not the conduct of a man whose mind is slipping. That is the conduct of a man who plans ahead." He paused a beat. "The petitioner claims his father is no longer capable of managing his own affairs. What the record actually shows is that his father has been managing his own affairs and methodically documenting the petitioner's mismanagement of them for the past 9 months, with a level of precision that most people half his age would struggle to match." Judge Lacombe had been reading while Beaumont spoke. She set the papers down, took off her reading glasses, and fixed her gaze on Nathan Haley directly. "Mr. Haley," she said, and her tone carried the particular flatness of a judge who has reached her conclusion and is communicating that conclusion to the room rather than opening it to debate. "Your father did not simply demonstrate full cognitive capacity in response to this petition. He demonstrated it by anticipating your actions, recording them in systematic detail, and assembling a legal defense of sufficient rigor that this court finds no basis whatsoever to question his competency." She placed her glasses on the bench with a small final click. "The petition is denied, with prejudice. With prejudice, in legal terms that closed the door. Nathan could not return to this court on the same grounds. The door was shut and bolted behind him. Nathan turned and looked at me. I looked back at my son, at the boy I had raised, at the man he had become, at everything that stretched between those two things that I had somehow failed to see clearly until it was standing across a courtroom from me in a new suit. My eyes burned. My chest carried a grief so old and so deep it had its own geology. But I held his gaze and I let my face do only what it was honestly doing, which was simply being tired and clear and finished with pretending. Corinne grabbed Nathan's arm and pulled him toward the aisle. I caught her voice low and fast, running the arithmetic aloud. What this meant, what came next, what their options were. Nathan went with her. He didn't look back. I walked out of that courtroom into the October sun, and it landed on my face like something I had earned. The week after the hearing, Charlotte's first cold snap dropped in overnight. 20 degrees gone by morning, the kind of shift that reminds you the year has been moving right along, whether you took notice or not. I found my flannel shirts in the back of the closet, pressed and stacked exactly where Lorraine had always stored them in April, carrying the smell of cedar from the blocks she kept in every drawer. I stood there a long moment, breathing that and said good morning to her, the way I did every day, then got dressed and drove to Beaumont's office. Nathan and Corinne had moved out 4 days after the hearing. No confrontation, no raised voices. Corinne had started packing on the morning of October 16th, with the brisk efficiency of someone following a plan she had mapped out well beforehand. Nathan carried boxes in silence until he stopped in the hallway with one under each arm and looked at me, sitting at the kitchen table with my coffee. His face held something I couldn't pin down exactly. Not quite shame, not quite anger, not quite grief, but some depleted mix of all three. The expression that surfaces when a person no longer has the reserves to keep performing. "Dad," he started. "Drive safe," I said, and I meant every word of it. The front door closed. Maple Run Lane went quiet again. Mine. Beaumont's office felt different in late October. Lake Norman, visible through the window, ran lower and grayer, the trees on the far bank stripped down to their bare shapes, holding a spare honesty that suited what we were there to do. "The will amendment is ready," Beaumont said, setting the document in front of me. "Take all the time you need." I did. 11 pages drafted with Beaumont's characteristic thoroughness. No gaps, no ambiguities. Nothing a hostile attorney could pick apart years down the road. Section 1. The house at 4417 Maple Run Lane would transfer upon my death to the North Carolina Workers' Dignity Foundation, a nonprofit providing housing assistance and vocational retraining to workers disabled on the job. I had found them online, gone through their annual report twice, and called their executive director myself. Their answers satisfied me. "You sure about this one?" Beaumont asked. "I spent 40 years in a shop where men lost fingers and eyes, and worse," I said. "Yes, I'm sure." Section 2. The remaining balance of the Medical Savings Trust would establish the Lorraine Ann Haley Scholarship Fund at Garinger High School, where Lorraine had taught English for 19 years, supporting students pursuing vocational and technical education, exactly the kind of investment she had always believed in most. I stopped when I reached her name. Lorraine Ann Haley Scholarship Fund. My vision went completely. I pressed both palms flat on Beaumont's desk and breathed through my nose, working to hold myself together. The grief came up from somewhere below the sternum, the old kind, the calcified kind that has settled into your bones over years, until something as plain as a name on a printed page disturbs it all at once. "Take all the time you need," Beaumont said quietly. I waited for it to pass. "She graded papers at that kitchen table until midnight," I finally said. She knew every student's name. She always said the best investment a person could make was in someone who hadn't had a fair start. I looked at her name on the page. She was the finest person I ever knew. Section 3, Nathan Roy Haley, $1. Under North Carolina law, leaving a child out entirely invites a challenge on grounds of accidental omission. A nominal bequest makes it unmistakably clear the omission was deliberate. $1, precisely what he had earned. I signed every page with Beaumont's good pen, and on the last page, the one bearing Lorraine's name, I signed not with hesitation, but with something closer to reverence. "It's done," Beaumont said. I drove home the long way, past the old shop on Albemarle Road, past Garinger High School, past the oak tree visible 2 blocks from Maple Run Lane, still gripping its last leaves against the October wind. Inside, I put the kettle on, and for the first time in 7 months, the house felt entirely mine again. Nathan called me 11 times in the 2 weeks after the hearing. I answered twice. The first was a Tuesday morning, 10 days after Judge Lacombe's ruling. The rehearsed warmth had drained from his voice entirely. What was left was something rawer and thinner, a wire stripped of its insulation. "Dad, I need you to understand something," he said, and his voice cracked on the last word in a way that told me the crack was genuine. "Corinne's parents are demanding we return the cars, both of them. The attorney says the vehicles are evidence in the civil filing, and the Tollivers don't want to be named as recipients." A sharp exhale. "Gerald won't take my calls anymore. Wanda told Corinne we embarrassed them." I held the phone and felt something move through my chest. Not satisfaction, not vindication, just a deep, worn-out ache for the boy I had raised, who had somehow become this man on the other end of the line, watching his allies drop away like cargo off a listing ship. "Did you use my money to buy those cars, Nathan?" I asked. The silence stretched 4 full seconds. "It's complicated, Dad." "No," I said. "It really isn't." And I ended the call. He came to the house on a Thursday evening, 3 days after that. No warning. I opened the door, and my son was standing on the porch in a jacket I didn't recognize, his eyes swollen and red-rimmed jaw, unshaved in a way that had nothing to do with style and everything to do with a man who had stopped tending to the ordinary upkeep of himself. "Can I come in?" he asked, and his voice splintered completely on the last word, breaking open into something so raw it pulled at my own throat. I stepped back. He came in. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where he had once explained to me that $14,000 wasn't a significant amount, that I had plenty, that I wasn't going to take it with me. He sat looking at the surface of that table and couldn't seem to bring his eyes up to mine. "Corinne is staying at her parents'," he said, though even her own parents had pulled back from her over the car business. Nathan's hands lay on the table shaking, and he pressed them down hard against the wood to make them stop. "I don't know, Dad. I have no idea how to undo any of this." Something in my chest seized a pain I recognized, old and exact, less like being hurt anew, and more like a scar splitting open along its original seam. This was my son, the boy who once sat on the school steps with his lunchbox waiting for my headlights, who broke down at his mother's graveside in a way he figured I hadn't caught. Loving him hadn't dimmed. It had simply found a way to exist in the same body as knowing what he'd done to me. "Nathan," I said, and keeping my voice even cost me something I won't try to measure. "The thing you're sorry about right now isn't what you did to me. It's that you got caught." His mouth opened, closed again. He didn't argue it, and that silence was its own kind of answer. "Get yourself a lawyer," I told him. "Return every dollar you took, and then figure out who you actually are, once you're not propped up by money that was never yours." I let a beat pass. "I'll be here when you call, but this time you climb out on your own." He nodded once slowly, the way a man accepts a verdict he's been expecting. His eyes were full, and he didn't bother covering that up. He got to his feet and pushed the chair back in, the way I'd corrected him on when he was 6 years old, then moved to the door. "Dad," he said, his hand resting against the frame. "I know, son," I said, "because I loved her too, and there are some things that don't need to be spoken out loud to be real." He walked out. I stayed at the kitchen table and listened until the sweep of his headlights crossed the wall and the room went dark again. Then both my hands went to my face and I breathed slow and ragged and long into that small dark space between my palms. December settled over Maple Run Lane the way it does every year without announcement. Just cold moving in branches going bare, the morning light arriving thin and flat and truthful. I was at the kitchen table at 5:30 when Beaumont's call came through. I'd been up since 4, same as always, same as it would be until the morning stopped. "Good news," he said, and the warmth in it was genuine. "The court issued the repayment order yesterday. Nathan has 18 months to return $22,540. Structured payments supervised by the court." He paused. "Dr. Nanaji also reached my office. She asked me to let you know the November imaging came back encouraging. The tumor has reduced significantly." I put the coffee cup down on the table. My hand was unsteady, not the way it gets with fear, but from something else entirely. The particular physical shock of relief landing in a body that has spent months tensed for the worst, and no longer remembers what good news feels like in the muscles. "Thank you, Cedric," I said. The words came out rough, off balance, and I left them that way. For all of it. Vernon, he said, "You did the work. I only held the door." When the call ended, I put on my coat, took my coffee out back into the December cold, and went to stand beneath the oak Lorraine had put in the ground the spring we first moved here. The tree was stripped to its skeleton, now dark limbs spread against a sky gone white in gray arms, going not up the way young trees reach, but outward and wide, the posture of something old that has quit competing with the sky and settled instead for taking up more of the earth. I laid my palm against the bark, cold, solid, real. "The imaging is good, Lori," I said. A small cloud of breath drifted off. "The tumor is shrinking." My throat clamped down, and I kept going anyway. "Nathan has to pay it all back, every cent. The court ordered it." My thumb moved along the rough ridges. "Whether that changes anything in him, I can't tell you. Maybe nothing does. But it's true, and it's documented, and I have to let that be sufficient." I stayed out there a good while, not thinking much, just breathing the cold. Then I went inside, put more coffee in the cup, and took my seat the same chair I had sat in for 42 years, at the same window, looking at the same tree I had just had my hand on. And I finally let the question surface that I had been navigating around since April. When exactly did I start confusing rescue with love? The answer didn't come fast. It arrived the way winter light does, no warmth in it, but nothing hidden either. My whole life I had been stepping between Nathan and the consequences of his choices. Every stumble I was there, every shortfall I filled it. I gave those things the name of love. I gave them the name of being a father. I told myself it was what the job required. But here is what I know. Now, a man who is always caught never develops the reflex that teaches you how to land. And a man who never learns that reflex will sooner or later fall from somewhere his father can't get to in time, and he will look us around genuinely confused for the arms that were always supposed to be there. I had not ruined my son. I held on to that clearly in the December kitchen. What I had done was stop performing the one act that had been grinding us both down, absorbing the impact before it could reach him. Ending that was not unkindness. Ending that was the most truthful thing I had managed to do for him across the entire span of his life. Through the window, the oak stood bare and wide and still living after 42 winters. I thought of what Lorraine said the afternoon she planted it, that she wanted something in that yard that would be there after the two of us were gone. She had been right about that, the way she had been right about most things worth being right about. I finished what was in the cup, rinsed it, set it face down on the rack. The December sun had climbed some small and cold, and not pretending to be anything else. One eye I lost in an accident. The other, the one that took me the longest to get back, was taken slowly over years by the son I refused to stop trusting. And maybe that is not the thing a tragedy is made of. Maybe it is simply what it costs to be the kind of man who doesn't quit on his children. The question I carry with me now, sitting in this kitchen on Maple Run Lane, is whether what I paid was worth what I got. Most mornings I feel like the answer is within reach. They say the Lord measures out exactly the hardship each man requires to become what he was always supposed to be. For 72 years, that made no sense to me whatsoever. These days, it does. If you've been with me through this whole story, thank you. I mean that. This one costs something to tell. Vernon Dale Haley spent decades believing that a good father absorbs every blow headed toward his child. He gave until the giving was used as a weapon against him. And when the moment came to stop, to finally let the consequences fall where they belonged, it wasn't revenge that drove him, it was clarity. I believe God allows certain painful seasons not to break us, but to burn away the confusion about who we really are and what we were put here to protect. Vernon found that clarity late, but he found it. Here is what this story taught me and what I hope it leaves with you. Document everything. A paper trail is not paranoia, it is protection. Start building yours before you need it. If someone's kindness only shows up when they want something, pay attention to that pattern. Love doesn't have a billing cycle. Stopping the rescue is not abandonment. Sometimes the most honest thing a parent can do is let a grown child meet the ground. And finally, your name on a legal document still means something. Know what you own, know who can touch it, and make sure the answer to that second question is the right one. This has been a family revenge story, in the truest sense, not about hatred, but about a man who refused to let the people he loved most take everything he had built. If you are in the adults 50-plus season of life, and something in Vernon's story felt familiar, I hope it also felt like permission. Permission to protect yourself. Permission to stop pretending. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Honor Revenge Stories so you never miss what comes next. And leave me a comment. I read every one of them, and your words matter more than you know. Thank you for being here. I'll talk to you in the next one.